Commission. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we will be holding a public hearing on a city-initiated code amendment to the Downtown Riverfront Special Area Zone. And that's City File CA-20-1. So my name is Tiffany Edwards. I am the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. And to start, I'd like to have each of the commissioners just briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Commissioner Fragola.
My name is Lisa Fragola.
Good evening. My name is Chris Ramey.
Ken Beeson.
Stephen Baker.
Great, and again, I'm Tiffany Edwards. Tonight we also have the following city staff present. We have Emily Proudfoot, we have Emily Jerome, the city attorney's office, and we have Jeff Gepper with the planning division. All right, let's skip ahead here. All right, so tonight's hearing is for an application for a site-specific code amendment, which staff will briefly summarize before we begin taking testimony. The Planning Commission's role is to make a recommendation to the City Council on whether to approve with modifications, or deny the application. The decision-making process on this type of request is considered quasi-judicial, so we will be using a quasi-judicial format for this public hearing. Before we begin, the Eugene Code also requires that planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, biases, or abstentions. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, the parties are entitled to an impartial or neutral decision maker. To ensure this fair consideration, the Eugene Code and the Planning Commission's rules attempt to limit ex parte contacts or communications between a party and the decision maker outside a public hearing process. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communication they may have had about this application outside of the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any conflict of interest, that is, whether the decision they are about to make could or would result in a personal financial gain to themselves, their business, or a member of their household. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased, that is, for whatever reason he or she is incapable of making an objective decision on these applications. Commissioner Taylor, who is absent today, has recused herself due to a potential conflict of interest. Her statement is a matter of record and can be viewed as part of the application file. So at this time, I'm going to ask if any other commissioners have anything else to disclose. Commissioner Beeson.
I haven't had, I guess I'd want to disclose I worked at eWeb for a good number of years. I left there in 2010. I haven't had any ex parte contacts, and I'm feeling capable of making an objective, non-biased decision. So I'll just disclose that I was an employee of eWeb.
Okay.
Just to be clear, that's not even a potential conflict of interest for the record.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll also ask if there was anybody in the audience or a member of the commission who wishes to challenge the impartiality of any of the planning commissioners. Okay. It's always good. The purpose of this hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the request before us. Therefore, your testimony should be directed towards the approval criteria that you believe apply to these applications. We ask that you frame your testimony in terms of the applicable approval criteria because the Eugene Code requires that our recommendation be based on the approval criteria. For reference, the application approval criteria are listed on the staff report. Those wishing to speak during the public hearing should submit a completed request to speak form to staff. And once the public hearing is opened, speakers will be called in the following order: those in support, and then those with a neutral position, and then finally those opposed. I'm also going to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond will preclude future appeals on that issue. And as a reminder, the Planning Commission will not make a final decision on this application. We will be making a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold their own public hearing before making a final decision. We may make our recommendation to City Council tonight, And if not, we have a future meeting to deliberate before we make our formal recommendation. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and have staff begin a presentation. So Emily Proudfoot, you're up.
Thank you very much. So yes, I am Emily Proudfoot. I am the project manager for the Downtown Riverfront Park project, and thanks again for having me back today. I'm here today to present a proposed change to the relatively newly updated Downtown Riverfront Special District Code. The goal of this proposed language is to resolve a recently discovered conflict between City Council-approved riverfront park design amenities, so park amenities that fall within the riverfront district view corridors established in the code. So, as a reminder, here are a few images of the park. Let's see here, I'll try to briefly orient you. Have a highlighter? I do, there it is. So, steam plant to the south, EWEB headquarters to the north. We have 3 streets that are here and view corridors that have been established in the code. So park amenities include a new bike path, and then overlooks at each of the, within each of these view corridors. There's one existing here at the plaza. And then a pedestrian walk that then helps you, get out and over those view corridors. So they extend back into the neighborhood. These view corridors are established in the code. So in your packet for this evening is a set of documents that highlights the series of actions taken by City Council last July upon the recommendations of the Planning Commission. So here's another view of the park, and the area in question in this moment is here at the end of Fifth Avenue, where we have a proposed art pavilion as an important part of our park design. So in addition to significant amendments to the special district, Council also approved a standards review application for all of the Willamette River Goal 5 areas to be affected by park construction and riverbank enhancements. So those all went together as one big package along with a whole bunch of other things, as you remember or may remember. And so these new park amenities include the construction of the River Pavilion. It's an iconic art piece located at the end of Fifth Avenue in the new Downtown Riverfront Park, but also within the view corridor of the future Fifth Avenue as shown in this figure here. So here, let's see here. So there's the art pavilion and I think if you were in attendance for some of the park presentations I made last year, this was a big piece of exciting artwork that have proposed for this site. It reflects the river in this location. It's a reflective piece all by itself, and it's been really kind of an iconic hallmark of placemaking within the Downtown Riverfront Park. And this is the code figure that refers to the view corridors and building heights and all other things. The star is not in the code right now. The star is the location of the art pavilion as proposed. And so the blue lines indicate the view corridors within the land use code. The proposed language in front of you seeks to resolve this conflict by changing the code within the special district's cultural landscape subsection to require that any proposed park development within view corridors meet the conditions within the Goal 5 standards review process to be approved. Since the art pavilion was and has been approved through standards review already, this change would rectify the code conflicts and allow for this construction of this important park feature. And I think also sort of to be clear, the code change that we're talking about would apply to a super narrow area within each of the view corridors. So they would only be within park property. It would only be within areas where the view corridor crosses into the Goal 5 area, Goal 5 protected areas. And in your packet, there are some, the approval drawings for those Goal 5 areas are. And in this condition, it's a very narrow, relatively narrow band because the eWeb site pretty much qualified as a pre-developed condition. So, so again, this is a very sort of discrete application within Goal 5 and view corridors. So let's just see here. I have a few more slides, basically of the location of the river pavilion. It's quite an open structure, and the idea was that it would, sort of frame a view. Let me just get this to work. And there's a cross section. Technical failure. You get the idea. I think that concludes my presentation.
Oh, it moved.
It moved. Oh, that's great. So now you can see the cross-section there. I think it's pretty useful to kind of see at the elevation at which you'll come into the site and then view out over the river. I just have a couple more photos, I think, that are useful. No. So that's a view looking back up into the development under the pavilion. And then, we've done quite a bit of work on the river already. And so these are 3 photos looking from pretty much where the pavilion will be built, if not further back. We've done a lot of laying back of the bank, and so the view to the river now is super expansive, both up and straight across and downriver. So it's a super exciting place to be on the river right now, actually, especially anticipating all the developments that we will have coming this summer. So I can take your questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions from commissioners?
So will we have a chance to ask questions later after the hearing, or?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just going to wait for that.
Okay. I have a quick question.
Sure.
From how far back, because I think that this came up in deliberations on a different issue, but I'm curious, how far back can one actually see the river from any of the view corridors? Does that make sense? Because if you're standing at if you're standing on High Street and Fifth, you actually can't.
You can't see
the
it,
river
because the surface of the river is relatively low, and it changes with sort of how much water is being let out of the dams, if we're honest, or how much it's rained. But it is way, way more than you used to be able to see. So as we laid back the bank and did a lot of site work and some select tree removals, and where we're building those view corridors, eventually there'll be buildings on that site, but from pretty far back now, you can see the river surface, and I'd say it's like a couple 100 feet back at least. So it's pretty. It's so exciting because I don't think we've ever had that kind of visual access to the river up until now. It's totally transformational. And you really had to go to the edge before to the edge of the bike path to be able to look down. You'd sort of see through the trees, but it's totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, at this time, if there are no other questions currently, I'll go ahead and I'll open the public hearing. And I don't have anything that would indicate that we have anybody who's wishing to speak. So I just want to confirm that be the case. Okay, hold on, I'm going to flip the page here. Okay, so I guess I'm going to close the public hearing then. Sorry. Okay, so the public hearing is closed, and I'm at this point going to ask if commissioners have any questions of staff.
Hi. I have a series of questions. Let me start with the easy. Can you go back to the site plan?
Of course.
So the idea, at least the way I understood the idea of the view corridors, because one of the big ideas behind the whole riverfront redevelopment was that we'd be able to connect the public to the river. Mm-hmm. And so the view corridor was a mechanism that allowed you, even though you can't see the water, from back as far as the railroad tracks, you could see through the buildings, and that was why they were drawn the way they were. So I think Tiffany.
Is this
I'm
the
sorry.
one you want to look at? Is this
That's perfect. I think Commissioner Edwards was beginning to get at the point. My question, and I know you don't have this rendering, but my question would be, as you move back up the Fifth Avenue corridor, how much does that pavilion enter into your view?
So it will always be in the view, I think, but it's pretty, like the ceiling of it's pretty high, right? So the lowest point is like 12 feet and the highest point is like 15. So, people are down within that pretty far. So you have a view and the structure is fairly, they don't have these huge legs, right? So you can really see sort of between it. And I think it really kind of frames the view. So I still think you'll be able to see the river quite clearly, up Fifth Avenue before the buildings,
Right.
even crowd in there.
So that's the straight face test are
Yeah.
we really honoring the idea of a view corridor, even though we're building something in the view corridor? And so that's why some of these about, it's a pavilion, it's relatively transparent, you can see under it, you can
Yeah.
see over it.
Yeah, that is all true,
Okay.
I think. And really the intent of that was really, we never thought about blocking the view. It was all about the views. I mean, it was really, the design of this was really, and the consultant team really thought about how do we enhance this view and make it a special place.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I was just curious again about the view corridor. I never thought of it as actually seeing the river because, you're up at Fifth Avenue and High Street. You're not likely to see the river.
You may not see the water, that's correct.
Right, but you would see the other side.
For sure.
Right. And so, I mean, city council wants to do this, whatever, but why couldn't the pavilion have been located just to the right of that view corridor or just to the left of the view corridor? What would have prevented that? And how would that have made any substantial difference to the pavilion? You would still be able to see through, and then when you got closer, you'd see this thing off to the side, and you could still utilize it and, have the great river view. I'm sure 40 feet wouldn't have made any difference. So why was it particularly located there rather than just off the view corridor? Fifth Avenue, by the way, it seems to me is really the only real view corridor. All the other streets don't go anywhere. They don't go into downtown Eugene at all. They're, they hit the railroad tracks, and there's buildings and other things that are blocking the view from being seen from a city street, unless you're within a block or two, in the park itself, the riverfront. Anyway, that's my question.
I think this is, it's a good question, and we've thought a lot about it. But I think really ultimately, the design team was looking at the development site as a whole, and knowing that the park was going to be first. You're really looking. It provides a very critical entrance moment to the park, right? So it becomes a destination and a thing that you walk through to go see the river, so it draws you there. So it's very intentional, I think, to create it as a draw for the community to come down to the river, and there's a place there. It's placemaking. And I think that is the short answer, is that intersection is kind of the fundamental arrival from all the way back in the Whitaker.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, take a couple more questions. So the idea of the water resource overlay review process already taken place, and now we're amending the code after it took place. Do they have to do it again, or is it retroactive, or how does that work?
One of the things that we've done, in your packet, is the ordinance itself, and we were careful to include some recitals in the ordinance to create that legislative history. I mean, when this question first came across my desk, I first looked at the actual code language, which says, a view that's unobstructed by structures or buildings. And it's not even clear that this is a structure that obstructs the view. But largely for transparency purposes and to make sure that we're not treating ourselves any different than we would another developer, we looked at the fact that the council and the planning commission both approved this structure in this location simultaneously with the approval of that particular drawing. And we believe that the intent was that this should be allowed and was not what we meant when we said an obstruction of the view. And so I look at this from a legal standpoint more as a clarification of the earlier intent. I don't think there's any legal problem with now clarifying this language and being very clear that what we are talking about is that earlier approved site review, or design review, which is, what do we call it? Standards review. And that's the only way, and in the only location anything else could ever possibly go in those areas, through that same kind of rigorous process that happened as part of the previous package.
So, thank you for that. I didn't actually hear an answer to my question, but
It's not a problem.
it sounds like, there you go. It sounds like you've got, so that my last question is, what does the process for the overlay zone standards review permit look like for the next pavilion? How rigorous is that process and how does it work?
So I can kind of take that. So a standards review is a type 2 application, which means it's at the planning director level. So that would be a decision by the planning director appealable to the hearings official. That being said, I want to be very clear that the standards review only applies for those things that are being developed within the water resources conservation area.
Level 5 area.
And so in that way, it's actually quite limited when you look at some of the drawings that are on the site plan drawings for the standards review. It shows how narrow the band of that conservation area is. So in terms of how rigorous it is, one, developing within that small band in order to have a standards review is rigorous in itself. And then the standards themselves, it depends on the type of development as to which standards apply from the water resources conservation zone.
Well, I had type 2, you had me at type 2. I just wanted to know what the process was and where that got appealed to and what that meant. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? So I have a question for Emily.
You gotta be more clear.
Yeah.
Jay.
Which one?
That's a good point, right? Emily Jerome. So in the materials that we have in the packet, there's code language that has a number of highlights and whatnot. What I'm not seeing is specific recommended language that would be,
So attachment
is that what we're,
D.
does our motion
I
look like?
actually
Yeah.
uncharacteristically gave you the ordinance that we would be taking to council.
Okay.
So brief.
That's
So if you look at attachment D, the ordinance itself, there's but 2 sections to the ordinance, and the first shows the change that we would be making to the code. And it would literally just be adding the language that you see bold and italicized on that very last page of your packet,
right,
on the top there.
okay. Okay. So my question then to the commissioners would be, does everybody feel comfortable with deliberations this evening? Are there questions that you might still have, or? You need, yeah, right. Okay, so then I would entertain a motion.
I move to recommend that the city council adopt the ordinance as proposed.
Second?
Do I have a second? All right. Any discussion?
Well, I just like to say that I recognize the difficult position you're in. At the same time, I'm a little disappointed that it came to this, but I think the solution's rather elegant. And I think all the public work, the public input that went into it to get to here, it's probably the right decision. But I don't know if I'm speaking for Commissioner Baker, but for myself, I really wish this would have either been highlighted in the first round or moved 50 feet so it was, because the idea that the public has access to the river is essential to this whole thing. And so that's why I was, trying to understand how those view corridors work and trying to make them as clear as we could in the code, because even though you can't see the water, being able to see through, even along the railroad tracks, all that's, the river's for the public. And so we want them not to feel like they can't go there. And so keeping a view corridor down was a big part of that. So I'm going to vote for this, and congratulations on crafting a great way for us to go.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I'm going to vote for it as well, although I do have similar misgivings. I think you could have highlighted the path to it with other design elements, or, how you did street elements and lighting and other things. And and still been able to have, the pavilion just slightly out of the view corridor. And my perspective, and I know this is difficult because you have hired a design firm, and this is what they are recommending, and they've made a case for it, and the Citizen Advisory Group probably has supported it as well. It just seems like this is really the only real view corridor. All the others just happen to be street endings from the railroad and aren't really view corridors. Fourth Avenue is already has, EWEB's building in the way with a little, window. You see nothing really. There's a fountain that blocks part of the low view, and then you have the connecting structure. But again, if this is what the city council wants, then I think we should support their perspective, because I don't think there's anything in the ordinance that would, in the plan that would prevent this kind of change being made if it makes sense. So I will support it.
Okay, Commissioner Fragola.
Excuse me. So I just want to express that I'm excited about the plan. And I was a member of the commission that strongly advocated for the view corridors. It was an important component of the conversations that we had. And I don't think that this hinders the view. I think it enhances the view. I think of this as an urban park. This is not a wilderness park, it's an urban park, and I think the structure will enhance and create a focus that will draw people in. So I'm incredibly excited about this project. I'm excited to move forward, and I think it's a beautiful design, so I support it.
Okay. Commissioner Beeson.
I wasn't here when the commission first looked at it. I went through this material pretty carefully. I guess I share some of the sentiment I've heard up here. I don't really, given that I don't have any real misgivings, I'm going to support it. I think the design is a good one, as from what I can see of it. As I went through the material, and I think the way that you've talked about it, it seemed pretty straightforward to me that there was a design that came together, I think with probably a lot of input and a lot of thought. And there was an ordinance and a standards review. And then there was a inconsistency, I guess, that was kind of noticed. I think this is a good solution to that. I think at the end of the day, as this is all put together over time and developed, I think the view corridor will still be, I think it'll be clear, and the visuals across the river or down the street, I think will be fine. So I'm also excited about it and ready to support it.
Okay. So we have a motion and we have a second, and if there's no more discussion, I'll go ahead and call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay. Looks like you've got a 5-0 vote. So with that, is there any other items from staff that, before I go ahead and adjourn the meeting? Commissioner Baker.
I was just going to ask staff, since there wasn't an appeal of the second half of this meeting didn't occur, we had another meeting planned for tomorrow night, and I haven't seen any information on whether that's still.
That's been canceled.
Okay.
So we'll make sure that we have that reflect on the website so that the public is aware that there will be no follow-up meeting for tomorrow. I think we probably kept it just in case we needed it for deliberations on this. You just never know. So, okay. Well, with that, I will go ahead and adjourn our meeting for this evening.